Our top story continues to be US President Donald Trump's tariffs for India, but the pally that US President is becoming with Pakistan is also very new. Now, Donald Trump announced a new energy partnership with Pakistan, saying that the two countries will work together to develop Pakistan's massive oil reserves. He even hinted that India could end up being a potential buyer of this oil. In a post on his platform, Truth Social, Trump revealed a trade deal, calling it a major opportunity for both countries. As part of this growing partnership, Pakistan is expected to receive its first shipment of US crude oil as early as October of 2025. In fact, Washington has also revised its tariff for Pakistan, reducing them from 29% to 19%, signaling a clear shift in trade dynamics. The announcement, remember, came just a day after President Trump slapped India with a 25% tariff, along with what he called an unspecified penalty for continuing to buy Russian oil and military equipment. Now, in a striking remark, Trump also said that both India and Russia are dead economies, adding that he doesn't care what India does with Russia, as it has always brought a vast majority of its military equipment from them. Now, India, in response, has issued a very measured but firm statement reaffirming its commitment to a fair, balanced and mutually beneficial bilateral trade agreement. In fact, the government also stressed on its priority to protect its own interest of its farmers, entrepreneurs and small businesses. Take a look.
India and the United States share a comprehensive global strategic partnership anchored in shared interests, democratic values, and robust people-to-people ties. This partnership has weathered several transitions and challenges. We remain focused on the substantive agenda that the two countries have committed to and are confident that the relationship will continue to move forward.
Meanwhile, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio appeared to downplay the tension, calling India a strategic ally, saying that it was unrealistic to expect allies to agree on every issue in foreign policy. So how does one look at Trump's oil promise to Pakistan and tariff diplomacy with Pakistan vis-a-vis what he announced for India? Joining me to discuss all these critical, changing geopolitical facets with US-India at the center of a major row are Jayant Dasgupta, former ambassador to WTO. Also with me is Professor Swaran Singh, Center for International Politics, JNU, and Ambassador J.K. Tripathi, former Indian diplomat. Thank you very much, the three of you, for taking time out for joining me on the show today. I have to come to you first, Ambassador Jayant Dasgupta. We've been discussing the changing dynamics between India and US. But what's come as a surprise of late is how pally Trump is becoming to Pakistan, and not just that oil reserve deal that we saw being announced. We're also now looking at tariffs being revised downward for Pakistan. What are we making of this changing geopolitical order?
Well, Pakistan is not a major supplier to the US of goods, and neither is it a major buyer. From what I have read, its exports to the US are just over about $7 billion, and it imports about $6 billion or thereabouts. So if you look at the total Pakistani exports and imports, it is below $100 billion, whereas for India, it is much, much more. Many times more. As far as this oil business is concerned, and President Trump, his two sons and his son-in-law own 60% of an enterprise which has now joined hands with some kind of an institution in Pakistan to form the Crypto Council, which will perhaps yield rich dividends for the Trump family. That is what has appeared in the press. This happened about 2 months ago. Now, President Trump has been trying to also provoke India by trying to show that he is also quite pally with Pakistan. Now, this oil business, if you look at the facts, Pakistan has reserves of about 0.2 billion barrels of oil. India's reserves are $4.11 billion of oil, known reserves. So there is a scale of about 8 times more in India. Now, if the US wants to exploit this oil reserve, it will take at least 5 years. And also, it has to sink in, whichever company wants to go in there, will have to sink in billions of dollars on oil exploration. Now, which company would want to do that is open to doubt. The last point I wanted to make is that one shipment of Texas oil is coming to Pakistan. Pakistan is a major buyer of Middle Eastern oil, and it also gets a lot of credit facilities from the Saudi government and the Saudi Aramco. So, whether it will be able to pay, considering that its reserves are in the region of about $10 billion or give and take $5 billion, that is the kind of reserves that Pakistan has. So US may be interested in selling oil to Pakistan, but whether it would be able to pay for its oil, that is a problem which I'm sure his advisors would be telling President Trump about. So I don't think we should
That
read
there's
too much
always
meaning into
more
this.
loan that you can take. there is always the financier by the way of China. I think that may just play up. But without making light of the situation, Professor Swaran Singh, a conversation and as a meme that I'm looking at on social media is that does Pakistan really have that much oil? If it does, it's news to even Pakistanis for that matter. But I have to ask you, this isn't the first time. If you are looking into the geopolitical, shake-up with how Pakistan is now having some sudden found interest in US, or rather US is having some interest in Pakistan. This geopolitics shift is not new. Every time and again, we have seen, Pakistan, in fact, being a close ally of the US in the past. But I think what's more harmful or hurtful to a lot of diplomats, to a lot of people looking at this scenario unfolding, is how Pakistan is being used as a bait by US president, continuously trying to taunt India in a way, saying India may soon end up buying oil from Pakistan.
Indeed, I think that is the only use Pakistan has for United States to become a frontline state. So right now, for example, United States has developed major tension with Iran, and that makes Pakistan relevant. And now they want to taunt India, as you mentioned. That makes Pakistan relevant, but they will drop Pakistan without, batting an eyelid, as we have seen several times before. And Pakistan knows that also. Now, as for the oil, United States definitely is looking for more buyers of US oil because Donald Trump wants to increase its US exports. The fundamental reason for the paranoia that is driving this knee-jerk, whimsical, mercurial kind of initiatives from President Trump is the fact that United States world trade today has a trade deficit nearly $1 trillion. And who is its main adversary? China. China has trade surplus of nearly $1 trillion. And that is what creates paranoia in United States. And of course, US now has a debt which is more than 133% of its GDP, which itself is inordinately large GDP of about $28 trillion. So he has reasons, and same are reasons for India. India's trade deficit in terms of goods trade is now $45 billion, and in last 5 years, this has increased over a period of time. Of course, when many people don't look at the services, if you look at the services, which changes the picture completely. For example, then you will see 35 to 40 billion dollars of trade surplus with United States. So it's a fairly balanced trade if you look at both
That's right.
goods and services. But he's trying to do all these things simply A, to sell his oil to whosoever can buy it. I'm not sure, as the ambassador said, whether Pakistan can really pay enough money for it. Pakistan's oil, whatever it is, reserves are scattered and therefore not commercially easily viable.
Right.
And anyone who goes there will have to build pipelines, refineries, ports, storage, and safety. Look at China. China has faced major insecurity in its investments in Pakistan. So, these are only hawks gestures,
That's right.
fundamentally to push India, because you see, 1st August deadline was for tariffs. It's not a deadline for negotiations between India and United States.
Which brings me to an important point. The negotiations, as we both all know now, will carry on. That's exactly what Trump said, and Indian government has also reiterated that we're still trying to arrive at a negotiation. Perhaps the 5th round of conversation, which are slated to happen in August, could see some sort of breakthrough. What are your expectations, Ambassador Dasgupta? Are you hoping that there will be some relenting on India's part? Because what we do know so far, that the only two obstacles that India and US trade deal are facing is by the way of concessions in dairy and farm sector. Do you believe India will make some concessions?
I don't think India has any leeway in making concessions on dairy, genetically modified foods, and in certain sensitive areas of agriculture. There is just no leeway that India has. So that is, I don't think that is going to happen. That is the first thing. The second thing is, President Trump keeps shifting the goalposts all the time. He's now talking about Russian oil. He talks about military supplies. Tomorrow he may say something else altogether and say that I will slap further tariffs on you. In the case of Brazil, he has said you are not treating ex-President Bolsonaro well. So 50% tariffs. Brazil actually has a trade deficit with the United States. So according to the formula that President Trump had applied, Brazil should not have been slapped with any tariffs at all. So it is a kind of a moving, target which he's setting, and India has already, from all the reports that have emanated, has made very good offers. If President Trump feels that he can pressure India and he can coerce India and get a better deal, I think he's mistaken. And India has the habit of digging its heels in. It will stand firm, and uh, the ensuing talks from the 25th of August in the 6th round may have this huge overhang of the 25% tariffs, and it may vitiate the atmosphere also. I mean, no unpleasant interactions will take place, but India's stand, I think, will get even more, rigid, if at all.
I was quite
So,
surprised, Ambassador, to hear that Trump and many of people in his government said that US negotiators are frustrated. I believe, if anything, Indian negotiators would be frustrated at this point in time. If there are only 2 points of contention and they're important to the Indian government, they're important to India's farm sector, then and they are non-negotiable. So perhaps US should have buckled by now, because from all the conversations that we saw happening between the delegations, it appeared that India is ready to budge everywhere else. And Trump also said that India is very willing to open up most of its sectors. So if there are only 2 sectors which India is not ready to budge for its own internal reasons, then perhaps there should have been made an exception. But I think what came as the worst sort of surprise, Professor Swaran Singh, was a penalty for buying Russian oil and Russian military equipment. Now, the penalty, we don't know the number yet. That number hasn't been discussed, hasn't been arrived at, I'm given to understand. While, the tariff kick in starting today, the penalty would kick in at some point of time. We'll get a number later. But that comes out of nowhere. That was simply unexpected. And it does look like, there are pressure tactics being used by US to arrive at a deal that it thinks is fair.
Absolutely. In fact, when Prime Minister had gone to United States in February, there were conversations that India would like to explore possibilities of buying more defense equipment from United States, also buying more of energy. And even in the media, there was talk about $25 billion worth of annual purchase of American oil potentially. So India has not been shy of making offers of, finding where we can help United States in enhancing their exports. And in that sense, there was also conversation of small modular reactors for nuclear power generation. So there are constantly from February, if you notice, from the time budget was presented and Harley Davidson tariffs were being brought down, India has made constantly piecemeal gestures of concessions, including even in agriculture. India doesn't produce too much of soybean, for example, and United States is a major exporter, and India is willing to enhance the import of soybean, for example.
Right.
But as Minister has clarified again and again, now in Parliament as well, that India's micro, small, and medium industries, labor-intensive sectors are not where India can go beyond a point to make concessions. And I always remind sort of few of yours, look at the 2018 RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, that India engaged in serious discussions to make Asia's world's largest free trade area of 16 nations. But India had to walk out of it in last hour because India could not really make concessions or compromises on labor intensive sectors.
Right.
So in this case, particularly agriculture and dairy, but even others, pharmaceuticals even, there are sectors where India has made gestures and offers. And in that sense, I think counter offers have to come from United States as well. It can't be one-sided. Now, as Ambassador will vouch, diplomacy and negotiations are all about finding a golden mean that serves interest of both sides. Now,
Right.
it's not the give and take approach that President Trump has. He only wants to take and not give anything in that return. And that is where I think it is not a matter of whether Indian side is frustrated or American side is frustrated. Both sides will have reasons to feel concerned on many areas because both sides will have to make concessions. And if it is a diktat that only India should be making compromises, it's not going to lead anywhere because beyond a point, India will not. I'm not saying India shall not. India will not be able to make concessions beyond a point. And United States fully understands that. I think this is only pressure tactics, and they know that negotiations are going to continue in coming weeks. Even these tariffs are going to start from 7th of August. So we might see several tweets, several tweets every morning coming from President Trump, and maybe changing language even in next 7 days when these tariffs have to actually hit the ground. There is no clarity as to how they are going to be implementing these. It's a blanket 30%, 25%, how they are going to be deciding which sectors and how much. And in that sense, if that clarity doesn't come in, there is already paranoia. There are estimates that India's exports to United States to come down from 87%, $87 billion to $66 billion, about one-third reduction. So that is going to make India dig heels even deeper in that sense. So I don't
Absolutely.
think it's a smart strategy to get concessions out of India to try and behave like a bully and make
And
funny hoaxes like Pakistan selling oil to India. That's a crazy story because Pakistan, just like India, buys imports about 85% of its own oil for consumption at home. So
right.
even if they start developing certain amount of their own domestic oil, which looks very impossible, Turkey was the one that signed another agreement in March this year. Nothing has happened on the ground. In July 9, Turkish ambassador, foreign minister was in Islamabad and said we are still to look at how to start that process.
Right.
No country so far, not even China, which is investing about $20 billion, promising $60 billion under CPEC, even they have not thought of oil and gas in Pakistan. They go for Myanmar in that case.
So
So I think
clearly,
this.
an attempt there to irk India, and India is irked for that matter. Pramit Pal, head South Asia, Eurasia Group, also joining us on the show. Pramit Pal, you are, I'm sure, aware of all the memes, all the conversations on social media, all the conversations that people are having on national television. There seems to be quite a dislike for Donald Trump. He's not very popular, at least since the last past 48 hours. The statements that he's made seem to be against India. Now, there's a blow hot, blow cold policy that Trump is adopting vis-a-vis relationship with India. What sort of impact will it have on long-term India-US ties?
Well, there will be. The point is that what we're seeing in America is the rise of an isolationist right-wing populist movement. We call it the MAGA or whatever you want to call it, which is very clear that it has no interests, or at least under Trump's view of it, there is no real concern about long-term strategic relationships. Trump has attacked enemies, allies, partners. He doesn't really he's not particularly concerned. I mean, Canada, a country that could not be closer to the United States, has been hit with a 35% tariff, right? Which will be immediately hugely disruptive to both economies, not just much more so than India. Canada has a very strong link to the supply chains of the United States. So Trump and this MAGA movement will continue to be in place because it has in many ways cannibalized the Republican Party. The Mamdani victory in the New York mayoral primary is an indication of a left-wing populist movement that is also breaking out and will probably consume the establishment Democratic Party as well, and has very similar economic philosophies. They're not perhaps as abrasive or unilateral as Trump, but they're also very America first oriented. Their view is that the globalization of the past 40, 50 years has not worked in America's advantage. So there's a clear breakdown in the consensus, if you wish, on both the left and the right in America about America's role. And we will have to hedge against where these two sides will go. Until there's a certain degree of, should we say, stability, the pendulum comes back to something a little bit more stable. But that could take as much as 10 years before that happens. But I think a couple of points to be made here. Even within the MAGA, there's several strands to this. You can see very clearly that the one represented by the US Vice President, J.D. Vance, for example, is very clear in his view that America still needs overseas partners. It just needs different partners. And those partners include India. There's not necessarily something Trump necessarily endorses, but we're very clear that there are groups in the American, even in the MAGA system, that are favorable to India. We also know that when our ministers meet, whether it's the defense secretaries, foreign secretaries, intelligence chiefs, the Indian side has come out and said, well, actually, we're getting very positive feedback. So there's also very clearly elements within the establishment. But we'll have to be careful. We recognize that
right.
with Trump,
Right.
we're going to have to be wary about long-term commitments with the United States.
All right, long-term commitments, what sort of commitments will they be, and will India and US arrive at a trade deal, albeit interim? The growing relationship between Pakistan and United States, and what does it really mean for India? On the show with us is Jayan Das Gupta, former ambassador to WTO. Also with us is Professor Swaran Singh from Center for International Politics, JNU. Ambassador, I think one of the conversations, and we would like to wrap up with, would be what happens hereafter. We now know that an interim deal could be arrived at, may not be arrived at, but we're looking at a trade surplus of almost $40 billion plus with the US. And if a trade deal were to not go through and there is no consensus going forward, how badly will we be hurt?
There are some estimates which have appeared, and because it's a constantly changing field, Pakistan, the tariffs have come down to 19 now. Bangladesh also, which is our major competitor for apparel, which we export in large quantities to the US, they were slapped with 35% tariffs. Yesterday, I think it has come down again to 19 or 20. And Bangladesh chief advisor Yunus has been speaking about how good a deal they have got, and India has failed to do so. So these are just irritants. Now, GTRI, the Global Trade Research Initiative, has calculated, it could be very wrong, that there could be a loss of about $25 billion worth of exports out of $87 billion. Now, that is one thing which we have to factor in, that there will be a loss of exports. Now, it will be on account of two things. One, that with the tariffs going up for all countries, there would be a contraction of demand definitely in the US. Consumers are not going to pay as much for buying the same volume of goods. So they will spend the same amount of money and they will get less. So the volumes will suffer.
Right.
So that is one thing which has to be factored in. It will go down for all countries. If Trump persists in keeping the tariffs in place for very long. But of course, there are issues that he may not be able to do so beyond, let's say, 9 months or so, because by June 2026, or even before that, there would be this backlash from the people and from the Republicans themselves, as Pramit Pal Chaudhary has mentioned. There are divisions even within the MAGA. So the loss to our trade will definitely be there. Now, on the other hand, we have to also calculate, for instance, if we want to escape paying this additional or penalty or whatever President Trump calls it, on account of dealing with Russian oil. At the moment, we are buying approximately $59 billion worth of Russian oil.
Right.
And if we, buy it from the open market, we will probably have to pay much more. So let's say we will have to pay $25 billion more. And we will also be annoying Russia, which has been a steady partner of ours, which has been through thick and thin with us. So things have to be seen on balance. And the last point I wanted to mention is President Trump, by his tweets and his saying India is a dead economy and Pakistan will sell oil to India, etc. I think he is making it very difficult for India also to come to an agreement because it is a one-sided agreement that President Trump has in mind. He's not going to concede anything, as Professor Swaran Singh was mentioning. There is no reciprocity in this. I will, raise the tariffs to 26. I will reduce it to 19. And for that, you have to pay so much. I will not reduce it beyond that to the pre-Trump era of December 2024. So there is
Right.
no reciprocity. Now,
Absolutely.
all this is going to get
A, a
scrutinized
one a one-way friendship, a one-way deal
That's
that
right.
perhaps India will not be very happy to arrive at.
No,
And
it is going to be very difficult for India to
absolutely.
concede ground now after it has blown up and President Trump has gone to town bad mouthing India in a sense. So it is going to, he's making it more and more difficult for India
Right.
to agree to any deal.
But India's reaction has been extremely mature. I think everybody in Indian diplomacy, in the governance in India, as well as the common people, we all realize this is extremely childlike to go out on record to say things without attribution, absolutely factually incorrect, to make light of very serious situation. I think that's as volatile as it can get. And for somebody to be sitting in the chair of President of the United States to be acting like a petulant child, I think it's not serving the United States very well at this point. But before I let you go, I also have to ask you, Professor Swaran Singh, I think it's also time for India to relook at the partners it can potentially make for its exporters, because the export market will likely suffer, and that volume has to go out. It has to be sold to somebody. What are the chances, what are the potential partnerships that India can carve out in absence of a better India-US deal?
Howsoever foolhardy the policies might look, it's also true that President Trump is world's most powerful leader of the most powerful country. United States is the largest consumer and therefore largest recipient of exports from several countries. For example, India's largest trading partner, largest source for India's exports. So such policies will create costs, will create challenges. I remember Ambassador was mentioning about garments and apparels. India doesn't have a very big share in United States, buys around 80 to 90 billion dollars of garments every year. India sells about 10 to 15 billion dollars. On the other hand, European Union collectively buys about double, 200 plus billion dollars of garments and apparels. India there is only selling about $5 billion. So, diversion where we will not have a similar, sort of high tariffs facing, making India's garment industries less competitive. Clearly, in case of American imports, you will have now Bangladesh, Vietnam, even Indonesia having advantage over India. So India will have to start looking at alternatives. And it's not just India. Whole world virtually is looking for alternatives and start making new partnerships and look for other supply lines in that sense. So India's recent FTA with UK can be an encouraging point to
Right.
accelerate India's FTA with European Union. Also, Japan, Australia, Canada, even China. We have a large trade with China, but India's exports there are very low. Would be another destination to go. So I think all countries understand that they will have to look at alternatives because none of them can afford to handle the demands that President Trump is laying on each of his, friends, partners, allies, competitors, adversaries, everybody. Same language, same deadlines, same diktats. So it has rattled everybody, but nobody wants to confront him because he's most powerful leader of most powerful country. And in that sense, they will find ways and means, and I'm sure India will find ways and means. India can focus on domestic, for example, market as well.
And
India can focus on make in India
for that matter,
emphasize.
Professor, our domestic market, at least our stock markets, have already, exonerated India's position. They've already given a thumbs up to India's mature response. It does look like it's not many people, at least the investors in India, are not very rattled with what could happen by the way of that 25% tariff. But I've completely run out of time on the show. Thank you very much for joining us, Professor Swaran Singh, Ambassador Jayan Das Gupta, for taking time out for joining us on the show today.